I would like to welcome all of you to the webinar this morning. I was just saying to some of the others before the rest of you got online that there's nothing like starting Monday morning with some tender writing content before we get into all the other busy things that we're doing during our week. So thanks for joining us this morning. And it's March, so we're right in Skilling Queenslanders for Work funding application territory at the moment, right in the thick of it, because applications close at the end of this month. So welcome to all of you on the line. My name is Stacey. I manage sector capacity here at QCOS, or the Queensland Council of Social Service, and it's my pleasure to deliver this webinar on tender writing skills, utilising the Skilling Queenslanders for Work funding initiative as our context for looking at how we approach tender writing. Now, QCOS has been working with DESBT for many years now to deliver this workshop and supporting the community-based organisations who engage with Skilling Queenslanders for Work to craft their applications for the funding. And we really enjoy being able to engage with DESBT and the sector in this way. So welcome to all of you. You will receive a post of an email with a recording of this webinar and any materials that we refer to today. So please don't feel like you need to write everything down. We will get some materials to support your learning after the workshop. And really happy for at any point during the webinar for you to take yourself off mute, ask questions, utilise the chat, and I'll try and keep up with that as best I can. And we're really lucky to have one of the team members from DESBT on the line today to assist us with any of those more nitty-gritty questions about Skilling Queenslanders for Work itself. All right. Now, I'm on the land of the Yagara and Turrbal people today, and when you're introducing yourselves when we first got on the line, I think that many of you are on the same land as I am today. I'd like to pay my respect to their elders, past and present. And as an organisation, QCOS thanks First Nations people for the gift of the Uluru Statement of the Heart, and we look forward to supporting the work leading to a successful referendum to enshrine a First Nations voice in Parliament, followed by Makarrata and treaty. Now, I would warmly invite all of you to acknowledge the land that you're on in the chat, because I know some of you are outside of Yagara and Turrbal territory. So please feel free to acknowledge the land that you're on in the chat. And I extend that acknowledgement, of course, to any First Nations people on the line today. Okay, so we've done a quick a few introductions. Some people who are based in Brisbane. We've got someone from Fraser Coast and around the state. Have any of you worked on a Skilling Queenslanders for Work application before and would like to share any of your thoughts about it? Have any of you come back for a second or third or fourth go after applying for Skilling Queenslanders for Work? Or are you all brand new? Looks like you might be brand new.
Grant from Sunny Coast. We've been involved in Skilling Queenslanders in this one since 2016. We've been running a number of projects across CQ, North Coast, Metro and Southeast.
Oh, great. So you've got lots of things to share then.
Yeah, I guess one of the things I would share is don't trust that if you've won one once and you don't freshen it up, that it'll get up again. That's probably a significant learning. Really
good advice, particularly given the workforce landscape climate has changed dramatically over the last couple of years. Ideas and the data that we were responding to a few years ago has changed quite dramatically. So really important to keep up with really scrutinising our ideas and ensuring that we set ourselves up for success by ensuring that they do respond to relevant needs of today rather than something that might have been relevant a few years ago. So I think that's a really good piece of advice. Thank you, Grant.
Hi, Mark here at Vision as well. Like we've been running the programs, but I'm personally new as the coordinator for it, so I haven't had a chance to write a tender yet. So yeah.
Yes, well, today's workshop should meet your needs, Mark, because what we're going to do is have a look at preparing for your application, and really putting forward your best case to improve your chances of success with funding applications. It is a competitive funding round, and this workshop really focuses on providing tips for community-based organisations to write a really great tender. And the context we are using is Skilling Queenslanders for Work. So for anyone who is looking to respond to that opportunity, today's workshop really is perfect for you. And look, you may have already submitted a funding application for the previous round of SKU, but as was just shared, new things come up, new things to respond to, and it's great to constantly be evaluating our applications and making sure we freshen it up before we resubmit. Now, this workshop and these tips have been put together in consultation with the Department of Employment, Small Business and Training based on their feedback from previous funding rounds for Skilling Queenslanders for Work, and based on QCOS's experience of reviewing and preparing funding applications across the sector and responding to all of the things that we also as an organisation respond to. So we're hoping that today will help you avoid any common mistakes that we have learnt from and that Desbert has picked up on over the time, and help you clearly articulate your ideas so that they come really strongly through in your application process. So that's the purpose of today's workshop. So what we'll do is we'll give a really brief background to Skilling Queenslanders for Work. I'm not going to go into great detail because there is a webinar that you can view online entitled Introduction to Skilling Queenslanders for Work, where we actually go into quite a lot of detail about each particular program under Skilling Queenslanders for Work. So if you're looking for really detailed information about the initiative itself, please go on and view that, and we'll link that in the post-event email. And there's a lot of information, really digestible information on the Desbert website as well. But today we'll do a very brief overview of Skilling Queenslanders for Work. We'll go into looking at a methodology for applying for funding, which you can apply across any funding that you're responding to, turning an idea into a funding application, and crafting responses to the assessment criteria. So we'll look at SKU as an example for that. Now, right at the end, we'll touch briefly on understanding your obligations regarding the Human Rights Act and Child Safe Principles, because if you are successful in receiving Queensland Government funding, these are things that you will need to be aware of. But of course, they're things that are great to be aware of anyway, regardless of the funding that we're receiving. Okay, so what is Skilling Queenslanders for Work? This is an initiative that's been an ongoing annual investment by the Queensland Government of about $80 million each year to support 15,000 Queenslanders into work. Now, this initiative represents a commitment to increasing workforce participation, driving job growth and strengthening the performance of Queensland economy by improving skill development and work opportunities for disadvantaged Queenslanders. And that's where QCOS really, a lot of our interest comes into this funding initiative, because QCOS is an organisation of peak body for community services. Our mission really is around supporting vulnerable Queenslanders to live a good life wherever it is that they are in Queensland, free from poverty and disadvantage. So Skilling Queenslanders for Work has been around for quite a while, but as we have just talked about, landscape for the workforce is looking quite different. We've had COVID. That has changed things in the workforce. We saw some workforce numbers shift quite dramatically through COVID. What people are looking for out of their work has shifted through COVID. We've seen natural disasters. There's been quite a few things happening in Queensland and across the world that has seen our workforce definitely changing over the last couple of years. We recently saw that Desbert had invested an initial $10 million into Skilling Queenslanders for Work, dedicated to community recovery projects for job seekers in flood affected areas. So we've seen quite a few great projects come out of that, working on some initiatives that assist communities to recover where they've experienced flooding. Now, Skilling Queenslanders for Work supports the delivery of tailored local community-based support to young people, mature age job seekers, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, people with disability, women re-entering the workforce, Australian Defence Force veterans, recently released prisoners, and people from culturally and linguistically diverse backgrounds. And it's really characterised by clearly defined target groups, voluntary participation, individual pathways, an integrated mix of assistance, and strong support for all participants. And the initiative is supported by a regional network working closely and forming partnerships with community-based organisations and local employers to determine local skills and entry-level industry and labour needs. And this program relies heavily on partnerships formed within communities to ensure participants have a pathway to employment. There are 8 programs that make up Skilling Queenslanders for Work initiative. So when you're applying for Skilling Queenslanders for Work, you're actually applying for one of those programs under the banner of Skilling Queenslanders for Work. And as I said, I'm not going to go into detail about all of those programs, but there is a webinar, Introduction to Skilling Queenslanders for Work, that does go into the detail of those different programs and actually provides some example projects as well, so you can see what others have delivered under those different programs. Now, these the characteristics of Skilling Queenslanders for Work, the individual pathways, the integrated mix of assistance, strong support for participants, strong partnerships in the community to respond to needs, is why community-based organisations are really well placed to apply for this funding and deliver these projects, because that is the work that you do really well. Okay, we've already talked about some of you have applied for Skilling Queenslanders for Work before. What was shared was ensuring that you freshen up your application, so don't rely, and this is for any funding really, just because you've received it previously doesn't mean you're a shoo-in for the next round. Was there any other advice that anyone could share regarding their Skilling Queenslanders for Work application?
Grant again, sorry.
No, you're right.
I think you've got to also have a fairly good research platform to base your tender around. So, diving into the regional stats, unemployment, but also industry growth projections and things like that lends credibility to the written component.
Absolutely. Really good advice. Thank you, Grant. Really having some robust evidence for your application is really important for Skilling Queenslanders Work, and it's really important for many funding applications that we submit. Your funder, whoever they are, want to be very clear about what it is that they're funding and what kind of impact their funding will produce. Important for us as organisations to have a really clear picture about the need in our community and what exactly it is that we're trying to address, and having some solid numbers and data to work from. That sets us up for success, because we know we're delivering a project that actually addresses a specific need, something that we can respond to with confidence. And that can only be good for us, because as an organisation, we will look, we will be successful in our project delivery, which sets us up really well for receiving future funding. So always important to make sure that we're responding to data. Robust data that's come from a credible source, that's been analysed, and we really understand what it is that it means. So whenever you're submitting any funding application, it's important to first understand the objectives of the funder and what they're looking for. So if you use Skilling Queenslanders for Work as an example, what is the Department of Employment, Small Business and Training looking for in a funding response? They're looking for community-based organisations who approach projects with the intent to provide genuine support and assistance for participants. This means organisations who understand their target cohort and their barriers to employment, and who can provide the support to help them develop the skills they need to gain employment in their local regions. So it's really not just about pushing through as many people as we possibly can through a Cert 3 or Cert 4 in something, or delivering some kind of training to them and just getting them through. It's about the genuine support that will lead to a long-term positive outcome. So that person finding a good job match for them, and a year down the road still being employed in the workforce and having and being satisfied in that role. For any tender application that you write, you must be clear about the intent of the funding to ensure your idea fits the brief. So for Skilling Queenslanders for Work, applications must demonstrate that the community-based organisation understands the intent of Skilling Queenslanders for Work programs, which are developing the skills of disadvantaged Queenslanders, that is people who are underutilised or underemployed in the labour market, as well as building the skills of people in the target groups, providing assistance to individuals who need support to enter and stay in the workforce, training and assessment strategies that support the needs of disadvantaged learners. Community-based organisations must have legitimate and established employer engagement strategies in place. So one clear point that the department has made to us is that training for training's sake is not acceptable. So again, it's not about pushing people through and just getting as many people qualified as possible. It really needs to be driven by the community-based organisation based on their understanding of their clients and not driven by the registered training organisation who might be delivering the qualification aspect of the project. So it's essential that in your application, you provide evidence that you understand your cohort or the clients or service users, whatever term you generally use in your organisation, in your community, that you understand their barriers and what resources they may need to overcome them, that you can provide assistance they need to gain employment. You know where and how you can recruit participants, and that's a really important question to ask yourself, particularly when you're looking at the size of your project and how many people you might attract. And that you have links to employers who can provide jobs in your local community. So providing this evidence is really crucial for any grant or funding application. And as we go through the rest of the workshop, we'll give you some tips on how you can do this. So how can you ensure that you meet the requirements of funders, serve your participants and community, and fund your work? And the answer, we would say, is to use a really methodical approach to winning tenders. So I'm going to take you through a 10-step process of preparing, planning, and writing a solid application. And these steps can apply to any funding or tender process, but we will use Skilling Queenslanders Work as our example throughout. So this is the methodology that we'll walk through today. And our recommendation is that you start mapping out your tender plan before you even start writing your response. And look, that does feel like a lot of work. You might, these applications for Skilling Queenslanders for this round will close on the 30th of March. And if you haven't started writing, you might feel like this is a lot of work to do when you haven't got a lot of time. My response to that is that moving through these steps will actually help you build a really strong case and save you a lot of time in the actual writing phase of your tender application. So by the time you get to the step 7, which is actually starting to put pen to paper, which is crafting your actual response to the assessment criteria, you will have a really clear idea about what you're including, and the writing part will flow a lot easier. So let's get started. I'm going to start in this top band, the prep phase of the methodology. And in this phase, we will talk about creating a grants reference library, understanding your purpose and capability as an organisation, and fostering strong working relationships. The phase of this methodology, this part of the methodology, really is about ensuring that your foundation is strong before you embark on tender writing or project delivery. And for someone, I know someone mentioned they're new to their organisation or they haven't gone through actually writing the application before, even if they have been involved in Skilling Queenslanders for Work and the project delivery. This part here is really important for really understanding the link between the funding opportunity and the values and the purpose of your organisation. And that is a really important link to make. So for those who've written grant applications before, this has certainly been my experience previously. I have been in the position of needing to submit something on the day and not knowing where an important document is, because sometimes, well, we have come to actually expect the unexpected, haven't we, with COVID and that kind of thing going on. Have you ever found yourself scrambling for information like the financial statement or insurance certificate 5 minutes before the tender is due to close? I know I have had that experience. It's very unsettling. And if for any reason you end up not being able to submit because you are missing something that's really important, what a disappointment that is. to find yourself having done all that work and not actually having at the end all the things that you need. So that's why we recommend having this grants reference library. It's where you have all the things that you might need for funding applications. And if your organisation does respond to quite a few funding applications, this becomes a really crucial part of your preparation. This way you have one point of truth. There's not several copies of the insurance certificate. There's not several copies of a financial statement. There's just the one that you need to be using for your applications. You could even keep in here a library of ideas that you might want funding for in the future. And we'll go through the kinds of things that you would keep in this type of folder. Now, this way, there's everything's there if someone's not at work for whatever reason on the day that you might need a critical document from them. You might not have realised that someone actually had a day of leave on the day that you need them. They might be on a plane right when you're needing a critical document from them. Someone might get COVID, they can't come in. Whatever it is, flooding, whatever it is that happens, sometimes people aren't there to give you the document that you need. And so having them all here in a folder where everyone knows where they are, really good way of mitigating that risk. So here's some of the things you might have in there. You might have audited financial statements, and you certainly need those for Skilling Queenslanders for Work. You need 2 years worth of audited financial statements. You might have things in there like your ABN. A lot of applications or funding opportunities these days do ask for resumes or CVs of key staff, or at least a summary of their experience and qualifications. A really good one to keep in here is a copy of past applications with any feedback you got from them. And I know Desbert is really generous in wanting to share feedback about your application. If you aren't successful in receiving application for whatever funding you're applying for, it is a really good idea to ask for feedback and to actually have that written down somewhere, saved, so that when you go to write future applications, you can make note of where your opportunities to strengthen your application for next time lie. You can keep evaluations in this folder to use as your evidence for your next application, and a summary of your organisational capability and history, things that you have delivered previously. And this is really good to keep here too if you do experience, well, all organisations experience some staff turnover, but it's a good way of making sure that everything that might support future applications are there. And it's not just in people's heads and then they leave the organisation and you haven't really kept a record of those things that would be really useful for future funding applications. So making sure all this is here in one spot where someone in the organisation knows where it all is a really good idea. The next step in preparation is understanding your purpose, your intent as an organisation, where strategically they're heading. It can be understandably really easy to get excited by funding that's available, but ensuring that the purpose of the funder and the purpose of your work as an organisation have some alignment is really important. I have certainly seen some organisations apply and be successful in receiving funding, not necessarily Skilling Queenslanders for Work, but other funding, where along the line somewhere it really became quite obvious that what didn't really fit with their core purpose as an organisation. That can become tricky for a variety of reasons. And one of those reasons is that the staff actually delivering the project doesn't really fit with why they came to your organisation. If the kinds of projects you start to deliver don't fit with the core purpose. Now, I want to be clear here and say I'm not saying at all that organisations shouldn't branch into new areas of work at all or not change what they do. But this is about the core purpose and mission of your organisation and ensuring that aligns with funding that you apply for. A tip from one of the assessors is to think about who you work with on a daily basis and develop projects to support your own clients. You know your core business well, and I'm sure you do a really good job of it. So leverage from what you already know and develop a project around the client group that you're really familiar with. Now, step 3 in this prep part of the tender writing methodology is to build strong working relationships. Now, I have already mentioned that Skilling Queenslanders work relies heavily on good local partnerships, good working relationships. So these are impossible to cobble together at the last minute. Any kind of relationship is difficult to cobble together in the last minute, but a strong working relationship where partners can trust one another and really have mutual understanding of what they're trying to achieve through a project, that's the kind of working relationship or partnership that needs to be built over some time. So forming partnerships is not something to be doing at the last minute. When you realise you need a letter of support to finish your funding application, if funding opportunities come up, you need to be ready to go. So starting early, being proactive in building relationships. Now, the good news for community service organisations is that you do this work really well. We see this every day. You have very strong partnerships and relationships with other organisations and with potential employers in your community. You're often very well linked to your community. And that's a great foundation for any work. And for Skilling Queenslanders for Work, this is critical. So if you're thinking about submitting a Skilling Queenslanders for Work tender, it's a good idea to talk to the funder and start building relationships with them. So Skilling Queenslanders for Work organisations are strongly encouraged, and Deb, I'm sure, will back me up on this, strongly encouraged to contact their local regional office to discuss a project proposal before you submit it. So they will be able to give you an idea about whether or not you're on the right track. We'll be able to have a bit of a chat to you about your proposal. And they'll be able to advise if they think it meets guidelines. Now, they're not going to help you write your application, of course, but they will certainly be able to give you a bit of an idea about whether or not they think that's a good one, or if your idea might need some tweaking, or if there's aspects of your project idea that you might need to have a little bit more of a think about. And of course, if you're working with a registered training organisation, which if you're applying for SKU, most of you would be, talk to them about before you submit your Skilling Queenslanders for Work application, because you need to establish in your application how you selected them and the nature of your relationship. So it's important to have a relationship with them already. Now, the good thing about Skilling Queenslanders for Work is it's something we know that keeps occurring through the year. So if you're looking at all of this as we move through the workshop and you're thinking, I'm not sure we've got all the ducks in the row at the moment and we're not quite ready to go on this for an application that's due on the 30th of March, I would suggest to you that you start working on all of those things now and be ready for the next funding round that might become available. Okay, so we've done a bit of prep work. We've got all the crucial documents we know we need. We know where our financial statements are. We know where the ABN and bit of a and we've had a look at we understand the purpose of their organisation, and we know we've got some good, strong working relationships in the community. The next phase is really about program design and project planning and creating the team who will contribute to the tender submission. Now, my key message here would be to start early. In a Grants in Australia report, 54% of respondents said that they had started an application that they didn't end up submitting, which is a real shame. Now, 38% said it was because they ran out of time. You can see that there on the graph. They ran out of time to complete the application. Now, I can't give you more time, but I think by following the methodology, you can help save yourself time and write a better proposal. So the survey also found that 27% dropped out partway through filling out the application form when they found out that the program wasn't right for them. And 16% of respondents said they dropped out after discovering that it didn't meet the eligibility requirements, which is a real shame. And one of the reasons why we read through the funding guidelines before we go any further down the track of considering whether or not we might apply for funding. So it really does pay to do the prep work before you start pulling the submission together, because that will really help you avoid these problems. Now, we've got a grant on a page resource with some prompters on how to map out your project ideas, and we'll work through what you could include in each of the sections throughout the workshop today. Now, as we're talking, if you've got it open on another screen, you might even want to start jotting down some ideas that relate to your projects. Maria will pop that resource in the chat in a minute. Now, the resources really help it's been designed to help you describe, analyse and design your project model so that when it comes to writing your application and answering the assessment criteria, you have a much clearer idea of what to include. And it also helps to think about how any of your project fits with your strategic plan and your organisation's mission. And this is what it looks like. Great. Mark's just said that he is, they're doing planning now to apply for the next funding round. And I think that's a great idea. I think that's really good to start now for the next time. That gives you plenty of opportunity to consider all the different things that will feed into a successful project, including those really important partnerships. So this is what the grant on a page resource looks like, and you'll get a copy of this in your, it's on the QCOS website. You will get a copy of it in your post-event email as well. Maria has just dropped it into the chat, so you've got several screens. You can bring that up if you like and have a look at it while we're moving through. Now, I find this resource helpful in a couple of different ways. It does help you start to map out what your project actually looks like and ensures you don't skip a critical detail of your project. But the other thing it's really useful for is having conversations with partners. So it's not only, though your organisation will be leading the application and the delivery of the project itself, this is a great resource that serves as a bit of a map to show your partners what it is that you're hoping to achieve and all the different aspects that make up the project. So you can print it out. Most people print it out on A3 and use it in their planning process. So some of the key elements of your project that you will want to be looking at. Who is your cohort? Who are you actually targeting? How are you going to address their barriers? Importantly, how are you going to reach them? How are you going to recruit them into the program? Are they people you already see? Are you going to have to go outside of your normal scope of delivery to go and recruit participants for your project? What is the project that you're going to be delivering? How would you summarise it in a couple of sentences? Where and how does it benefit your local community? What jobs are your participants going to be eligible for when they finish? So what kind of employers would you be building, potential employers would you be building relationships with at the moment? Where are these participants actually going to work? How many jobs are available in your local community and how many participants do you think you could realistically recruit? Who are you going to be working with? What partners? What level of industry involvement will there be? Will you be visiting potential employers? Would you be doing some, having some guest speakers to talk to your participants about the industry that you're really targeting? Who are the local employers who could support the project? How many local potential employers are there that you could be approaching to work with? How are you going to evaluate the success of the project? If you're looking at a Skilling Queenslanders for Work program, what's the expected KPI? What is success? What would DESBT consider to be success? There's a few different benchmarks for success in Skilling Queenslanders for Work. And those details are found on the DESBT website under the different program details. So this is all and even if it's not Skilling Queenslanders for Work, these are the questions that we're asking ourselves when we're first coming up with a project idea. For your own organisation, what would success look like? So these are all the elements that someone reading your application should be able to answer. Now, if you're participating in this workshop, it's really likely that you've already identified Skilling Queenslanders for Work as your funding opportunity. However, here's some other sources of finding grants. It's worth talking to partners and other organisations that you work with as they can give you first-hand experience. And remember, if you are applying for Skilling Queenslanders for Work, there are 8 different programs to choose from. So you're not just applying for Skilling Queenslanders for Work, you're applying for a program under Skilling Queenslanders for Work. And talk to the regional representatives in the department about your project and they can give you some direction. We will send all of these to you in that post-event email. Okay, so making sure, please, that you read the funding guidelines before you start your application. For SKU, for example, the guidelines of each program contain information on the objectives, the eligibility criteria, expected outcomes and KPIs, as I just mentioned, how applications will be assessed, and the assessment criteria. Now, when you're excited about a project and you just want to get started, it can be a bit overwhelming to go through all of this information when you're pushed for time. But it's really there's no shortcut to this. This is the only way that you're going to get all the information that you need and a clear and full picture of what's required. And this will have all the details on how to prepare a successful application. And it will be the only way that you can figure out if your organisation is actually eligible to deliver a project under the funding. So it'll have some little details in it. For SKU, for example, applications will only be accepted by the application portal. So it's not a where you're sending it through to an email address. It's an application portal on the DESBT website. Make sure you're registered and familiar with what's in the portal well before the deadline. Other resources that are available on the SKU website are the support guide, frequently asked questions. Make sure you have a look at those. And again, I will reiterate this several times through the workshop because it's really important. Make sure you run your idea past your regional office first. Make sure you're not missing anything critical to save yourself time and disappointment later. And the last question to ask yourself here is, do you have enough time? You might be better to leave it to the future funding round. And remember, for Skilling Queenslanders for work for this round, it closes on the 30th of March. But as someone has already shared, if you're not going to apply this time around, it's great to get started now so that you're really ready for next time. And generally, we see the rounds opening up usually around February and then perhaps July, August. So that's where you might be looking at another application in the future. This is what the guide to applying for funding work looks like. It's on the DESBT website. We will drop it in the chat now. It's a really good idea to read the guidelines and highlight all the key points you need to address and make a checklist for all the requirements so you can make sure you have all the necessary attachments, your information, your evidence, and so on, and you can tick them off as you go through your submission. So this is a screenshot of what it looks like. Maria has put it in the chat. And I think that this is a really great digestible document. It's really useful. It says very clearly under each selection criteria what it is that they're actually looking for. And of course, there's some contact details here. Again, please talk to your regional office. They're very friendly. I've spoken to most of them over the years in delivering these workshops. They're a really friendly bunch who will be able to let you know if you're on the right track with your project idea. There's heaps of information on the DESBT website. There's an email address up on the screen as well if you're wanting to send an email. So quite a few different ways to get in touch with them, but I know they certainly appreciate the opportunity to discuss your proposal idea before you put in all that work of putting the proposal together. Now, the next step here before we actually start writing is to figure out who's on your tender team and to create a timeline for your application. Who needs to have a role in the grant application and what are the key roles and responsibilities? Now, some tenders are far smaller or simpler than others. Some applications require quite a bit of work putting together quite a few different documents. So it's a good idea to figure out who might need to be involved quite early on because if they have a busy workload, which many community-based organisations, everyone in community-based organisations are working really hard and do have a big workload, they can make time for contributing to this tender application. So ensuring you identify quite early on all the people who might have a role in the application. Now, you might be thinking, I don't have a team. I'm just writing it. It's not no one else that's going to be writing it. But you do need to have a think about who might be involved other than just the writing aspect. For example, in your organisation, does someone need to approve your application before you submit? I know in my organisation, it certainly goes through a couple of approval levels. So you might have a chair or a president of your organisation, maybe your management committee that has to look at applications before they are submitted, or other people in your organisation, a supervisor, a manager, a CEO, etc., who might need to have a look at the application, and they might need a couple of days to do that. So you may actually need to have your part finished a few days before it's due so that they have time to approve and give feedback. Does someone else in your organisation have more of a role in the partnerships, and maybe they're the right person to be approaching potential employers or other community partners to write the letters of support that you would need for your Skilling Queenslanders for Work application. So though you might be doing predominantly the writing aspect, it's unlikely that there is no one else involved in this application process in your organisation. There are going to be other people that will have some kind of hand in it. So we've already talked about who might have sign-off, who might need to do approvals. Great idea to identify someone early on who will have time to proofread. It's really difficult to proofread your own work. And if that person has a busy role, you might need to get it to them a couple of days beforehand so they have time to proofread. Even if someone's role in the submission seems really small, like the IT person who might help you with problems uploading your documents, if you've got everyone on board early and include them officially in the team and you've let them know that there's something coming up, this is the date I'm going to need your help with it, or I need it done by a certain date, you get more ownership and buy-in to the project, which can be a great support when you're one of the main writers or coordinators of the submission. It's really good to have your team support to do that. So it does help to have a bit of a kick-off meeting, let everyone know a bit of a summary of the project, what you're doing, what you're expecting them to do, all the dates that are involved, and everyone knows who's involved in the whole process. And then we develop a timeline. So we have a look at the due date and we work backwards with specific tasks that need to be done. So if you know that your CEO needs 2 days to approve something, when we're looking at the 30th of March, right, that needs to be by him or her by the 27th, 28th. Proofreader needs to have it before that. So 3 days before that, we might get it to the person who's proofreading. So you're working backwards from the date that you know you're submitting and working out all the things that you need to do and allocating sufficient time for all of those tasks. So it means you're not left on the last day trying to proofread, trying to get approvals, trying to find the documents, all on that last day. So mark out time in calendars. And this is also the time where you would identify any problems that aren't a problem if you know about them well in advance, but are a problem if they're a surprise to you. For example, someone taking leave. If someone has a pretty crucial part in your project and you've mentioned to them that you're going to be applying for this funding, but they didn't actually know what date it was, and then they forgot they were going on leave, and they didn't really think about the fact that them going on a week of leave was going to affect your timeline, that's when things can get quite messy. But if you have a meeting right at the outset, outline what your due date is and when you're going to need particular things from them, you can avoid that problem altogether. You might need to shift your timelines. You might need to have things done earlier, but you won't get that surprise in the end where you risk not being able to actually submit your application. And it's during this time where we're looking at our tender team and our timeline, we're looking at all the things that we need to include in our tender response plan checklist. So really important inclusions that we might need for that tender proposal. So we're looking through the guide for funding, we're making note of the documents that we're going to need for each selection criteria, who in the team is going to be responsible for them, etc. So this is the part where everyone's really clear on what they're contributing to the process. On the second page of the Grant on a Page resource, there is a checklist there. You can add things to it. If different things have come up that you know you might need in your application, or if you're applying for some other funding, you can amend it. Using a similar checklist for any tender writing you're doing, it means pulling out the key points and requirements and making note of them and who's actually responsible for them. Now, evaluation, this is a really important part of your planning process. And often this is something people don't think about until the end, but it's actually something that's crucial to think about right at the beginning, so you have some kind of baseline data and that you've built it into your project plan as well. So how will you measure success? What does it look like for you? What does the success look like for your funder? How will you know that you're meeting your goals? Is there baseline data that you need to capture? Do you need to be asking participants a few questions right at the beginning? So making sure you're thinking about this right before, well, not before, just before you start your project delivery, but making sure you're thinking about it right at this planning stage. What does success look like? How will we actually track that? Is there anything additional we want to be asking? So really having a good think about that. And this aspect of project planning, this is where we get a bit of a reality check about what we think we can deliver. This is where we think about if our idea is realistic, the numbers that we're talking about, if they're realistic. When we start to think about how we're going to measure things, it is often the part of our planning where we go, are we being a bit overambitious with how many people we say we're going to be able to put through this? Once we actually have to measure this, do we think we could be successful? So it really pays to think about the evaluating in your project planning stage. And again, having a great evaluation for anything you're delivering really works favorably for you because it gives you a great set of data for future projects and funding. Next time you go for some other funding, you can say you've delivered this particular workshop. You've got a great set of data to say how successful it was. So don't miss an opportunity to evaluate the good work that you're doing. All right, we're getting to the good part now, and this is the actual writing part. Now, by the time you get up to this stage, if you followed all those other steps, you've got a really clear idea about what it is that you're wanting to write. And it should give you some great clarity. Now, we've talked about the importance of developing clarity around your project, writing the grant on a page piece, establishing your project team. You're really clear about the purpose of your organisation and how it aligns with this funding that you're responding to. And it's really important to approach the assessment or selection criteria with all of this key planning in place. And the key message we would have in this phase is to think before you write. So a key part of planning and thinking process is determining the structure of your response. Think about the structure as a scaffold on which your fuller response will be built. Every word matters, particularly when you have a short word allowance, which is the case for Skilling Queenslanders for work. So write your application as though the person reading it knows nothing about your organisational project and never assume anything about the reader. So it's important to note here that different people will be assessing your application. It might not be the same person assessing every aspect of your application. And you can't make any assumptions about how familiar they are with community work or the kind of work that your organisation does. So making sure that it's really clear. So the first point I'll make here in this writing aspect of the model is that we are not writing a novel. We're not talking about the length here or the fact that you can't be creative. I'm talking about the fact that the structure is fundamentally different. So creative writing tends to introduce characters and scenes, and the whole point is to leave us intrigued and wondering, what's going to happen next? How did we get here? And as we read further, we start to learn some of the answers to those questions, and the plot starts to develop. And we're wondering what's going to happen next. There's twist and mystery and conflict. And finally, we reach the resolution at the end of the novel. Tender writing demands the exact opposite. There's no room for intrigue and working up to a point. The reader wants to be hit with the key messages straight up. So you need to start with the key message and then provide your supporting points and themes. Then your detail and that very important data and evidence that we spoke about earlier. Now, by putting examples and evidence down the bottom, I don't mean to say it's less important, but that you need to start with your key message, and those examples and that data and that evidence, that forms the very foundation of your application. And again, evaluating your project thoroughly will give you a good set of data for future projects and funding. So don't miss that opportunity. Okay. So we use Skilling Queenslanders for work as an example. If you're trying to structure a response for the assessment criteria, which is servicing community and industry needs, which is one of the assessment criteria, you might highlight the key areas you need to address in the criteria. So you can see here I've started to highlight the really important things I need to include in my response. In this example, you need to demonstrate that you understand the skills and labour needs at the local community level. So again, as has already been mentioned, very important to look at that with fresh eyes. What are the current skill and labour needs in our local community? And you need to think about how your project is going to address those needs. You need to provide evidence of local industry demand and benefit to identify local skill shortages and future employment opportunities. Now, there's a really clear indication here as to what the assessment committee will be looking for. So make sure you talk about how your project will link with other local initiatives or services, and give evidence of your links to local employers. And don't forget to attach your current letters of support. And we will talk about those letters in a little bit. So if you're going to map it out visually, it might look something like this. You can use bullet points and sub-dot points and start to build your response from there. But using a visual map like this can be really helpful when you need to communicate your thoughts to others, and it can be really helpful when you need to stick to a word limit. So bear in mind, this is just for illustration purposes. This is an example. I'm absolutely not saying this is exactly what you need to do. But if we were looking at this selection criteria that we just had on the screen, this one about servicing community and industry needs, you can see here there's several things here that we need to respond to. We need to respond to the local industry skills and labour needs. We need to talk about the impact on wider community. We need to talk about how it's responsive to our project is responsive to local community and regional needs and conditions. So, and we know we've got a particular word count or character count at least. So this is the suggestion of how you might dissect your response to ensure you're responding to every aspect of the selection criteria, that you're providing a balanced answer, that you haven't spent half of your word count talking about one part of the selection criteria and then neglected to fully address the other aspects of the selection criteria. And it ensures you have a clear idea about what your key message is for each of those points and which clear piece of evidence you have for each of those points. Now, this is really critical for ensuring a balanced response, because the person reading your selection criteria response is going to have a look at it and ensure that you have actually responded to every aspect. And you might write 500 fantastic words about the local need in your community. But if you only leave yourself a sentence to talk about your project and the impact you're going to have, it really will, what it will mean is you will not be able to gain your full marks for that response, because you've spent a lot of words, nearly all of your words, responding beautifully to one aspect of the selection criteria, but you've neglected to actually address the others. So the assessor having a look at your application is only really going to be able to mark you on what they have in front of them. And that's that you haven't actually responded to the rest of the selection criteria. So really important that you're utilising some kind of way to ensure that you're putting forward a balanced response, and that you actually have a piece of evidence to back up what you're saying as well. And mapping it out like that makes it really clear, like, oh, you know, I know what my key message is here, but gee, that the stats I've got are actually from the census, from last census, and I haven't actually pulled out the fresh data yet, or that's actually data from 3 years ago, and I think things have changed since then, so I actually need to have a look at that. It really makes sure that right at the beginning, you're finding out what fresh evidence you might need to go and get, or where your response is lacking evidence. So here's a starting point. This is an example. It says here, Superhot has been delivering accredited early childhood education training programs since 2009. This program involves partnership arrangements between childcare centres and registered training organisations. In 2012, we expanded our program to include cultural competency training for working with Aboriginal families, as there is a large population of Aboriginal families in the region. In 2017, we added new training programs specifically targeting migrant and refugee women, as there has been a very significant increase in migrant families in the local community. Trained staff are a requirement of the Early Childhood Education Care National Regulations, and there is currently a shortage of qualified staff in Utopia. Unemployment and underemployment is significantly higher for Aboriginal and migrant women in the region, so these programs are helping to deliver employment opportunities. There is a growing number of families moving into the area, so demand for childcare is increasing. Okay, it's not that this is a terrible response, but there's a few areas here where we can simplify the language. For example, I know I read there somewhere very significantly or very significant. So there's some unnecessary words there. So we're using up our character count or our word count on things that we don't need to say. But the other thing that's missing here is data. There's no evidence. So this would require the funder to just take your word for it. When they're taking your word for it, well, not only as an applicant may not be super confident in what you're asking for funding for, but the funder hasn't got confidence in what you're actually trying to have an impact on, because it's not really, you haven't really established in this response the impact that you want to have. So here's a reworked version. Of course, this is fictitious and abridged. This is not a full application, and it's responding to something that's a made-up scenario. And look, we're not saying respond to it exactly in this way, but you can see in this example how all of those parts of the selection criteria that we looked at back here, all those parts have been really evenly responded to in this application. And there's been the addition of data. So they've talked about here, they've got ABS data. They're talking about percentages. They're actually saying how much the increase in population has been. They're actually talking about in that last paragraph what local support they've actually established. So let's have a read through this and you can see what I mean about how it's been improved. So first, we're looking at local need. With a growing population of young families in the Utopia region, there is more demand for childcare and kindergarten places. And in there, you would insert local council data. Trained staff are a requirement of the Early Childhood Education and Care National Regulations, and there is a shortage of qualified staff in Utopia. There are 5 childcare services in the town of Paradise, with a new service planned in the next year on the Paradise housing development. It is estimated that there will be a demand for 50 more qualified childcare workers over the next 2 years. So here you're really establishing what the local need is and being quite specific rather than just saying, oh, there is a growth in population and there is a need. In the second paragraph, the author is talking about the impact it will have on community. It is important that childcare workers have appropriate cultural competency training to support culturally and linguistically diverse families and encourage greater participation in early childhood education. There is a large population of culturally and linguistically diverse families in the region, including Aboriginal peoples and migrants. So providing childcare workers with relevant cultural training is vital. There is also a shortage of workers with relevant language skills. Then we're moving into a link for project need. Unemployment and underemployment are significantly higher for Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander and migrant women in the region compared to the regional average, which is 10 and 12% compared to 5.5%. So using some ABS data there. The project will expand on the work we have done over the last 10 years in the community to develop employment opportunities for Aboriginal women and migrant and refugee women while providing qualified and culturally competent staff to meet the shortage of appropriate early childhood educators. Then we're moving into local support. We will continue to work with the local council and Paradise Migrant Women's Centre to connect with elders and community role models. All 5 local childcare centres have agreed to provide mentors to work one-on-one with trainees and provide workplace opportunities. And of course, if you're saying something like that, you would need to have letters of support actually outlining what they have agreed to contribute to the project so that they are saying that they are willing to provide mentors to work one-on-one with trainees. So this gives you an idea of how you provide that balanced response to the selection criteria. And of course, you're not putting in the brackets and those bolded words when you're submitting your application, but they're just there as an example to show you how we've created a balanced response to the selection criteria. Okay, so let's talk more about that assessment criteria. Now, the assessment criteria tell you what's most important to address. So this is where you're getting a really clear indication about what the funder wants to find out from you. Your responding to the assessment criteria is the biggest part of your writing effort. Your answers will only be as good as the thinking you have done in preparation. And this is your opportunity to demonstrate that you understand the requirements, to provide evidence, to demonstrate your capacity to deliver, and to demonstrate value for money, and to articulate your unique value proposition. So the assessment or selection criteria should reflect what is most important to the funder. And that's not difficult to determine through the guide to funding and through the selection criteria that are put up for Skilling Queenslander for work. So these criteria will be used to score and rank your proposal in relation to others. So you should be aware, I have already mentioned it, that sometimes different people will assess different aspects of your application. So that's why it's really important to make each response quite clear unto itself. So here are some of our tips for answering the assessment criteria. Be really clear about what's being asked for in each selection criteria and what needs to be included. Ensure you understand what the funder is actually asking you. A good response will be clear, concise, and comprehensive. Now, I know that being comprehensive or being concise can be tricky, but we will talk more about that soon. Plan your key messages and put them up front. Make sure you know what evidence you're using for all of your claims. We'll continue to use Skilling Queenslanders for work as our example in responding to the criteria. So these are the 4 Skilling Queensland for work criterion and the ones that you will need to respond to if you are responding to this initiative. So for Skilling Queenslanders for work, they will be assessed in 2 stages and they're up on the screen now. So stage 1 assessment will involve the assessment against the capacity to manage criteria. And that's fairly self-explanatory. What this criteria is trying to establish is that your organisation has the capacity and capability to deliver this project that you're proposing. This will include things like your financial viability, your governance, your experience, your staff, and the experience you might have with delivering similar projects. And we'll go into some more detail on that criteria shortly. Now, stage 2 involves assessing eligible applications against the other assessment criteria by the department and locally based Skilling Queenslanders for Work advisory job committees comprising of representatives from the community, industry, government and unions. And the role of these committees is to discuss, prioritise and recommend applications for funding. So they're place-based committees, they're region-based committees. So this means that it's not just a DESBT head office or regional office that's looking at the applications and deciding which ones are successful, but there's actually a regional jobs committee in each region that considers what they know about their community needs and the applications that have come through in their region, and they put forward which applications they would recommend for funding. Really important to note here when we're talking about stage 1 and stage 2 of assessing the applications is that if your application doesn't pass stage 1, it does not progress to stage 2. So any applications that have failed to establish that an organisation does have the capacity to manage the funding won't be looked at any further. So really critical that you're able to establish that. So this is just a screenshot of that guide to applying for funding, which Maria shared in the chat earlier. And it's really clear. It says here what they're asking for, what they want evidence of, and what documentation you will need. So what things you'll need to attach. So what you're being asked here is about your financial viability, risk management, your reporting, what's your relationship to the nominated RTO, what relevant experience your organisation has in delivering similar projects. So this is what it will look like in the portal. This is just a screenshot. So you can see here that there's a maximum of 2,800 characters, not words. That includes spaces and punctuation. So if you're going to be thinking about how much writing this is, it's about a 3/4 to 1 full A4 page, or about 350 to 400 words. Now the app, you can see this little 200 plus. Hopefully you can see that in the corner of the box. Now that will give you a bit of a, not a timer. What am I looking for? What am I looking for? It lets you know when you've run out of characters. It'll start counting down from when you've only got 200 characters left. Now, it's fine to use bullet points here if you want to save on words or characters, as long as you address the key points and you're not writing lazily, like you're not using bullet points where it's unnecessary to do so. So you're only using it for brevity's sake and it has a real purpose. Now, capacity to manage is something that's going to be involved in any funding applications that you put forward. because they want to know that you're financially viable, that your organisation can deliver what you say you're going to deliver, that you haven't been too over-ambitious in your numbers and your capability as an organisation. You'll need to talk about your organisation, your track record, your staff experience, your experience in dealing with the identified cohort, which is why really you should be picking a cohort you know well and have already worked with previously. That you understand your cohort's barriers to employment and how you're going to reach your cohort. Okay. Oh, and you can see there, I'll just go back to here. In this guide to applying for funding, it really clearly tells us here in this right-hand column what other pieces of information you're going to need to submit. Okay, so we've talked about in our example response service and community industry needs. In this part of the application, you're going to need to attach letters of support from potential employers and industry groups. This is what it looks like here. And as you can see, there's a spot there to attach, to put in your attachments. And in this section, they're really asking you, how does your project fit into the local community? What is the actual community benefit? What's the link between the learner group and the skill shortage and labour needs? Why are they well suited to it? If your organisation is based outside of the delivery area, for example, if you're an organisation with a head office in Brisbane and you're looking at delivering something in Rockhampton, you will need to address the community industry links in that delivery location and how you're managing that. So make sure you really clearly articulate what the links are and that you know your community. So you must be able to establish that you know the needs of the community where you're delivering the project, that there's an industry that suits them and that you've done the groundwork to establish that. And that your project will fill a genuine labour shortage. Now, for criteria 3, these are strategies to assist participants. Now, this is where community-based organisations do really well because you have a lot of strategies that you use to assist participants in a lot of the work that you do. So essentially, Skilling Queenslanders for Work is an initiative targeting those who have had some barriers to gaining employment. Now, there are many reasons that someone will struggle to find work. And this criteria is your opportunity to show that you understand those barriers specific to the group you're targeting and that you have plans for how you're going to support those participants. So think about your organisation or services in your community who could assist you to support participants and whether or not you need to find out more about their specific challenges. You might need to think about childcare or a creche. You might need to think about language, transport to and from the location of the training, whether or not the participants can drive. You need to think about cultural safety. There are lots of things to think about here. And I'm sure there are things that your organisation thinks about a lot in the work that you do. Now, again, here's a screenshot of the submission portal. Note here that you're going to need to provide a template of a training and support plan. That's your organisation's plan, not what the RTO is delivering. So the highlights of going through the application early means that you can put things like this on your checklist because that's not something you can just quickly write really quickly. It would need some thought and some consultation with others doing similar work to you or possibly partners in the project. So making sure you're going through all of this quite early and you have it ready to attach to your submission. Okay, so strategies to assist participants. We'll have a bit more of a look at this because this is a really important part of the project because this is what gives longevity to your project impact. So yes, in your project, you're probably delivering some kind of qualification, you're assisting people to get a job, but how they will have longevity in the workforce, that's the real magic of Skilling Queenslanders for Work. It's about setting people up for long-term success. It's not just about getting them through the qualification, getting them into the job. So let's have a talk about this. How are you going to overcome those barriers? The really important thing about Skilling Queenslanders for Work, and the thing to keep in mind, this is about individualised support. So it's not about treating all the participants exactly the same as they move through your project. It could be quite different for your different participants. It could look like providing career advice. It could look like working through what kind of outfit you would wear to a job interview and practicing a job interview, doing a mock job interview. It could be referring for mental health support and calling on other organisations in your community to assist with providing support. It could be doing some case management. It could be making sure your program only is delivered between 9:30 and 2:30 because you know your participants have children at school and that they'll need to drop them off and pick them up. It could be having a creche. It could be organising to use another organisation's minibus to pick up and drop off participants because you know one of the key issues is transport. It could be helping those participants get a go card so they can use the bus, or helping them get their learner's license. I really recommend going through the project stories in the Introduction to Skilling Queenslanders for Work webinar, because there's some great examples of successful projects that have been delivered in that webinar. And they've just got great ideas about how they've supported participants. You have to be careful because there are some ineligible costs associated with Skilling Queenslanders for Work, as there is for any funding you might receive. But there is a lot you can do with Skilling Queenslanders for Work funding. It's pretty exciting, the kinds of strategies that you would be able to assist participants with. So have a look at those project examples and have a real think about all the different things that you might be able to, because there's not a lot that you can't do with Skilling Queenslanders for Work. So if you've got ideas about something that would genuinely support your participants, have a great brainstorm about all those different ideas and check out the funding guidelines just to make sure that all of the costs that might be associated with those supports are eligible. Of course, it's a really good idea to get in-kind support from other organisations and your own organisation. So it's not an eligible cost through Skilling Queenslanders for Work, but you can provide it or another person can provide it in kind. That's fantastic. Lisa has just asked where the project examples are. So if you have a look at the Introduction to Skilling Queenslanders for Work webinar, which is on the QCOS website, and if you could have a look at the slides that are associated with it as well, throughout that webinar, we go through all the different 8 programs that are under Skilling Queenslanders for Work, and there's some example projects for most of the programs, some great ones, including how much funding the organisation got and then how many participants they put through and what kind of support they offer to those participants. Yeah, it's really useful, particularly when you're new to Skilling Queenslanders for Work or any kind of funding. I think it's always really useful to have a look at, kind of benchmark what have other people done with this funding. Maria, thank you very much. Maria's just linked it in the chat, so there it is. So it's really important in this selection criteria to outline what the goals are and really spelling out how you're going to support the participant to overcome the barriers. Talk about how you'll provide job placement and post-placement support, what your transition to employment strategy really is. It's not sending people off and just hoping for the best. It's making sure you have some really clearly articulated strategies. So here's some more appropriate, finding appropriate training strategies. Thinking about cultural safety. We're thinking about dates, time of the day, what days it's delivered, accessibility, transport. How are they going to get there? Do they all have a license, or are you going to need to help with a bit of public transport or even picking and dropping off people? Some of these project examples I've looked at in the Introduction to Skilling Queenslanders for Work webinar, they talk about helping people get their learner license. So possibly by the end of the project delivery, they're on their way to getting their license, so that that's another barrier that they don't have to overcome. Sometimes it's about going and helping people get a tax file number, making sure they've got a healthcare card, whatever it is that they're eligible for. They're all these little bits and pieces that added up become a big barrier to someone having any kind of success in the workforce. But if they have you as a community-based organisation just helping them tick off that to-do list of all those little things, it can make a huge difference in someone's life. Really ensuring that the strategies that you're using are appropriate for your cohort. You know your cohort well, I'm sure. and you'll know what things are going to suit them best. Okay, and this one, criteria 4, we're talking about outcomes. So we've already touched on the fact that the different programs under Skilling Queenslanders work have different KPIs and what DESBIT would consider success for that project. And when they talk about success in Skilling Queenslanders for work, we're usually talking about moving through the qualification and gaining employment and staying in that employment. It could also mean for some participants that it reinvigorates something for them as far as their learning goes. And so success can also mean going on to do further learning. So sometimes participants won't go into work. What they'll actually do is enroll in another qualification because it's really been a successful experience for them in the learning aspect. And they might, if it's a young person, they might end up going back to school. They might enroll in something else. Participating in your project might really spark something for them, a new interest, something that they are really keen to find out more about. So that's also success if someone goes on to do further learning. So this criteria is asking you, what's the impact? What do you see happening at the end of your project? What was going to be the outcome? And this is where the funder is getting a really good idea about what it is that they're investing in. And this is what it will look like. So you might be detailing past performance, outcomes that you've previously achieved with similar or the same funding. And this is where it pays to have done your homework up front. So making sure you're reading the guidelines, making sure you know what's reasonable to expect. Looking at the KPIs, here it is. I've referenced this a few times. These are the guidelines for funding. This is a screenshot of the community work skills one, which some of you might be looking to respond to. But there is a document that looks like this for all of the programs. And I've highlighted here, I've zoomed in and highlighted here. You can see that they actually detail, DESBIT details here what the outcomes that are expected are for this particular program. So they would see your KPIs, if you receive this funding, would be that 65% of participants successfully gain the required outcome of the qualification and that 55% of participants successfully gain employment. So that gives you a benchmark. You know that that's the minimum that DESBIT is looking for out of this program. So by all means, aim higher than that. But of course, it's always useful to have a good idea about what the funder would actually be satisfied with as an outcome. So that's really useful for you when you're thinking about writing up your outcomes and your evaluation. So this really boils down to how are you going to help your participants get a job? What are those outcomes going to be? What do you envision them being? This is about really showing that you know the local community in which you're delivering the project. You understand the link between the qualification and skills that you're providing and that it matches the needs of local employers. And it shows that you know how you're going to support disadvantaged learners to overcome their barriers to employment. And of course, putting in any examples of past performance and outcomes achieved, either for SKU or for another project that might be similar, or at least have similar elements, is really important to evidence that you have capability. Now, when we spoke to community representatives on the Skilling Queenslanders for advisory jobs committees, remember they're the regional committees that actually have a look at all the applications that have come through for their region and give advice on what would be good to fund. They all said that it was important for applicants to talk about the connections to community and local employers. That's really not something you can skip out on in these applications. Now, cost and value for money. This is a really important part of any funding application. It's important to note that cost and value for money is not just about price. So DESBIT does have some nominal benchmarks for cost, as any funder does, but best value does not always mean the cheapest. You do, however, have to address how you came up with the costs. So you need to justify how these costs will help participants overcome barriers and get a job. It's important to outline how much in-kind contribution is included and what it entails. So remember to think about what your organisation is providing and articulate any in-kind support. Examples of in-kind support from your organisation or organisations that you're partnering with could include things like a training room, learning resources, catering, transport, etc. So it's anything that would cost money if you weren't providing it yourself, but you're showing the funder that you're actually able to provide that value yourself, or a partner of yours is able to provide that value. And you need to put in a rationale for how you came up to your cost estimates. So if you're saying, oh, we're providing a training room in kind, and that would usually, and that's worth, I'm just going to pull a number out of my head, $10,000. The funder is going to go, would a training room, if we were actually paying for that, really cost $10,000? You know, you have to think about what's actually reasonable and make sure you're not pulling numbers out of nowhere, but they're actually based on something. So you could say, a quote for a local venue training room that we obtained showed that the value of the training room for the delivery of this project would be $3,000. Whatever it is, I don't book venues, so I'm not exactly sure how much. My point is that these costs need to be substantiated somehow. So these tips apply to all of your tender writing projects. This is about having a solid budget. As I just alluded to, be realistic when you're setting your budget. We're not making up numbers here. It needs to be based on something. And you need to make sure that you've thought through all the costs in delivering your project. And this is where that grant on a page resource comes in handy, because it means you're not forgetting about any elements of your project that might actually cost money. Now, if your costs are on the higher side, and you might look at your final budget and go, gee, that's a lot for, supporting 15 people or 10 people, whoever it is, that whatever number you're looking to target, that's okay, but you need to make sure you've explained why the costs are that way in your application. It's not to say that Despert's going to just not look at anything that seems too expensive. If you can substantiate it, and that's not just for Skilling Queenslanders for Work, but for any funding application, if you're able to substantiate the cost, you're really in with a good chance. If it's a great idea, and it does look like it's a great project, even if the costs are a little bit higher. As I said before, best value is not always cheapest. You could deliver a real project on a real shoestring budget and push through lots of different people, but is the long-term outcome really there if they haven't been given really robust wraparound support? So that's what Despert's looking for. They're looking at that balance of, yes, value for money, absolutely, but also something that is going to have a solid impact. Ensure that all your in-kind support is in there, whether it's financial or otherwise, and the in-kind support of partners. Making sure you're checking the guidelines to see what costs are allowed in the funding, and thinking about how you're going to acquit your grant, how you're going to demonstrate the amount of time and effort that you budgeted for in kind has actually been contributed. And again, I really can't reiterate enough, reading the guidelines to make sure the costs you're putting in your budget are eligible for funding. There are some things that Skilling Queenslanders for Work funding won't cover, so please make sure you're not putting those in your budget. Again, the eligible and ineligible costs. The guide for applying to funding, which is on the Desbert website, makes it really, really clear. Now, this is a common mistake, but it's an easy one to avoid, not just for SKU, but for other funding as well. For example, you can't include office furniture or motor vehicles. So you can't apply for Skilling Queenslanders for Work and ask for $200,000 and then buy a minibus with it. But what you can do is include support costs, such as subsidised travel or meal programs for participants. The department has identified some confusion from a number of SKU providers in regards to providing post-participation support. Now, I'll be really clear about this here. If you're applying for SKU funds are only able to be expended on eligible activities until the delivery end date. Despite your final report not being due for another 90 days, the support you choose to offer participants in that period is in-kind support. So absolutely, not saying to cut off all your support from participants because your project's finished now, not saying that at all, but just being really clear that the support you provide participants after your project end date that's considered in-kind support. That support your organisation is choosing to provide participants, which is great. Include that in your project plan, in your budget, but just making sure you're realising that your SKU budget itself will not extend to that period. Make sure, number 2, you're including staffing costs. Now, this can be a little bit more complicated than what people initially realise. So make sure your wage expenses include everything such as superannuation and award increases. Make sure there's not an award increase during your project delivery period. Include the award rate in your budget, so Desmond knows what level people are being paid at. If your budget needs to include work cover costs, and it will need to if you've got trainees, check your insurance policy to ensure you're budgeting the right amount for each trainee. If you are submitting an application for work skills traineeships, and you will need to ask for work cover expenses, make sure you check your insurance policy and include the accurate figure. The assessors are familiar with what's an average percentage to be claiming for this kind of expense. So guesses that are outside of the normal bracket won't look very professional, and it may have them feeling uncertain about what other costs you have included in your budget. So be really clear around that. Spend locally. Is there someone you could be partnering with locally to cut down on travel costs? Those assessing applications look favourably on submissions which utilise local partnerships. It's sometimes easier to have partnerships with bigger organisations or businesses that approach you, but in the long run, this initiative, Skilling Queensland's work, really is about growing local partnerships and strength and supporting participants in their own communities. So not only do you cut down on perhaps travel costs or costs from organisations or partners having to come in from out of town, but by using local suppliers and trainers, you contribute to that long-term goal of forming community-based partnerships that have some longevity. And again, this can come back down to ineligible costs because travel but interstate isn't eligible for funding. So making sure you're not using, for example, an RTO that's from New South Wales. Grant's made a comment here saying in-kind support needs to be evidenced in a letter. So if the applying community-based organisation is providing the in-kind support, do we need a letter or is it sufficient to reference this in the text? I would say, Grant, that it needs to be substantiated in a letter. But Deb, I'm wondering if you're still on the line. I know you dropped out before and came back. Would you be able to clarify that?
Hi there. Yeah, I'm certainly no expert. I'm from the Education Employment Pathways team and getting my head around the SKU information. But from what I can understand, as much information as you can provide is always going to be better. So I would definitely be going for that letter of support.
Yeah. Yeah. Thank you, Deb. And that's my understanding too. It's much better to have it on their letterhead, in their words, saying that they will do it, not just an agreement that might have been between 2 staff members and that person has now moved on from the organisation, for example. You might have had a bit of just a verbal or email agreement with someone from an organisation saying, oh yeah, we'll be able to provide, I don't know, resume writing support to your participants. Next thing you know, you're delivering your project. That person's left that organisation. No one else at that organisation knows that that's what they were going to be doing. If you've got it on letterhead signed off by their CEO, it's actually forms a partnership. It makes it far more substantial. So I would absolutely recommend having in-kind support detailed in a letter of support. So it can't be, it's not, they're not contracted to do it, but it certainly gives it some more substance than just an agreement.
Yeah, Stacey, and thanks for that, Deb. It's more about so where you were saying you continue your support, up to 3 months post contract end date. And if you're doing that as the applying CBO, that's in-kind support. So my query is more around so if Five Bridges is applying, do I need a letter from Five Bridges to say that we're going to be providing that in-kind support?
Look, Deb might have an answer to this. My take on it would be great to have a letter from your CEO, your team, clarifying that yes, your organisation is in a position to provide whatever, and detailing what that support is, because post-participation support is quite a broad statement, isn't it? So it could be that our organisation is in a position that we're able to provide weekly check-ins with our participants for the first 12 weeks that they're in their new position, or we're able to provide interview or job interview preparation support for the first 12 weeks, so that we can support all those people to get into a job, or give them the best chance of getting a job. I'm making these things up, but you can see what I mean. Being able to clarify what that post-participation support actually looks like. And again, depending on the size of your organisation, I know in the organisation I'm in, it's really important to have a bit of a sign-off process for those kinds of in-kind offers anyway. So anything where it's going to draw on your organizational resources, whereas whether it's people, human resources, or otherwise, really important that it's a fairly formal understanding that that's something that your organization is committed to. Again, if there's any case of staff turnover or something, I would put it in a letter, so it's really quite solid what post-participation support you're offering. And then you can substantiate the worth of that in your budget as well. Hopefully that answers your query. Great. Excellent. Thanks for the questions. They're really good. I'm sure others were wondering the same thing. Okay, some really common pitfalls. Let's go over them before we move on to providing supporting evidence. So not addressing the assessment criteria, that's a really common one. It's easy to avoid if you're going to use the methodology that we just looked at. So what is the selection criteria? What are the couple of points they're actually asking me to respond to? How many words am I going to use to respond to each of those things? What's my key message? What's my evidence? Sometimes, and this is what happens if we don't do preparation before we start writing, we can get quite carried away talking about something we're excited about, because we're excited about our project idea. We're really keen to prove that our organisation can deliver something for the funder. And we get carried away writing about things that don't really hit the mark. They don't actually respond to what the funder was actually asking us. So really important that you specifically address the assessment criteria. You do not waste word count talking about something they haven't asked about. That's a really important one. Not providing a clear and accurate project summary. So if the assessors can't quickly glean from your project what you're talking about, your application isn't going to stand out. It needs to be really clear. And that's where that Grand on a Page resource really helps us out, because it helps everyone working on the project get really clear about what exactly it is that we're trying to achieve and what are the key elements of our project. Now, the next pitfall is not demonstrating local knowledge and the understanding of your cohort. Please don't choose to work with a cohort that you have no real experience working with and don't really know much about. That will become quite obvious in your application. Local community ownership is a cornerstone of Skilling Queenslanders for Work. It's really important that you address this throughout your application. You must demonstrate that you understand your target cohort and their barriers to success, and provide the evidence that you have the experience and capacity to deliver support to them and provide real specialist assistance to them as an organisation, and utilising the partnerships you have around you. Mistakes due to cutting and pasting from previous applications. People often think that this is going to save them time, but then you have to go through it with a real fine-tooth comb and make sure that you haven't accidentally used old data or said things that aren't relevant anymore. It can actually take more time than you think. By all means, use past applications as a starting point, but typing it fresh does help not accidentally carry over typos, old information, etc. And to be honest, this one, it doesn't require a huge word count, so it's not like you're writing copious amount of words. So I don't think you need to really be cutting and pasting anyway, but this is just something to be aware of. It happens all the time that people copy and paste information from past applications, and they'll have the wrong year in there, they'll have the wrong terminology in there because something about the funding has changed. Yeah, it's really easy to do, but easy to avoid. And a budget with no detail or incorrect numbers. Now, we'll talk in a minute about proofreading. Really important to have someone proofread your budget, someone who can make sure the numbers add up. This happens a lot. The bottom line doesn't actually reflect all the line items in your budget. A mistake has happened. And then what happens is your funder will lose some faith in the detail of your application, but also, you know, if they haven't picked up on the mistake, you might end up with a really incorrect budget because there was a typo somewhere that no one picked up on, and the funding you receive isn't actually going to adequately cover all those line items that you had put in your budget because the bottom line didn't actually add up. So it's just a really simple thing that, again, can be avoided by someone triple checking it. Now, as you're crafting your responses to the assessment criteria, you need to be thinking about what evidence you can provide in your support to support your application. Now, if you have gone through that scaffolding exercise where you're talking about each of your key messages and what evidence you'll be using to substantiate those key messages, you will already know. None of this is going to come as a surprise. You'll know, yeah, that's right, I've got to get a letter of support from that person. I've got to have the right census data for that point. I need to ring the council and get the current numbers for the amount of childcare centres in the region, or I need to contact, you've already gone through it because you might not have all of them on hand right now, but you know which ones you need to be gathering. So here we are looking at all the bits of evidence that we need to submit with our application. Partnership agreements, letters of support, project budgets, etc. So though you might be gathering your evidence as one of your final steps before you submit, it's really important that you're giving this quite a bit of thought beforehand. Now, make sure you provide evidence from local employers that they support and that they support the project you're proposing, not just support for your organisation. This is a mistake some people make with Skilling Queenslanders for Work. As you would have noticed when we were looking through the selection criteria in the portal, you need to provide letters of support. Now, it's very important that you can show a link between the training and skills development and the local employment outcomes. So make sure they're relevant to the training in your proposal, that they demonstrate industry need for the qualifications identified, and that they link to employment opportunities in your region and that they're current. Please don't use letter of support from a year ago. Things have changed from a year ago, and that won't cut it. The letter must say that they support the project, not just your organisation. So say, for example, I'm going to deliver a Skilling Queenslanders for Work project and I'm going to put people through a Cert 2 in hospitality. And I have got some letters of support from some local cafes who definitely are having trouble finding people to work in their cafes and they need some people with hospitality qualifications to meet their workforce needs. Okay, great idea. I go to my local cafes, businesses, my potential employers, and I get a letter from them. And then when I go to submit, I check the letters and they say, us here at Coffee Bean Cafe really love working with QCOS. They're a great organisation and do great work. We'd like to work with them. Yours sincerely, owner of the Coffee Bean Cafe. That doesn't say that they're anything about the project. It doesn't say that they would be willing to support someone or employ someone with the qualifications that I'm looking to deliver through my project. So that's not adequate. That's not an adequate letter of support. The letter cannot just say that they support your organisation. They need to be really specific. So this, again, is where that grant on a page helps you communicate with people who you might be partnering with or getting letters of support from. You need to clearly articulate to them, we're delivering this project. We're delivering this project in our local community because we believe it's a need. Do you agree that it's a need in our local community? Yes. Okay. Would you be willing, the qualification we're looking to deliver in the project is a Cert 2 in hospitality. Is that going to be suitable for the kinds of people you would be looking to employ in your cafe? Yes. Okay. So here you can see the kind of detail we're looking for in the letter. So the letter of support needs to say something like, we here at Coffee Bean Cafe have been experiencing a workforce shortage for some time. We are in desperate need of people with this particular qualification. We would be happy to support. We're really happy to support the project that QCOS is looking to deliver, delivering a Cert 2 in hospitality to people in the local community. At the conclusion of the project, we would be very happy to consider applicants that have come through the program to see if we're able to give them a position at the cafe In the next 2 years, we're looking to employ 5 more people on our staff with that particular qualification. Now, obviously, this is just a scenario I'm making up, but that's the kind of detail we're looking for in letters of support. It's actually supporting the project idea, the qualification you're delivering. They're not guaranteeing that they're giving someone a job, but they are providing support for the idea of it. They are saying we would be looking for someone to employ someone with that qualification in the near future. So through gaining various letters of support, you're creating an evidence base to submit to the DESBIT that there is definitely a need for this in your local community. You haven't just pulled this out of nowhere. You haven't made this up. And when participants move through your project at the conclusion, there are likely to be jobs for them in your community. And again, making sure the evidence is current and relevant. Things have changed so much. A letter from a year ago, 2 years ago is not going to be suitable. So making sure you're getting those fresh dated letters of support. Any questions about letters of support? Because they're a really critical aspect of your application. If you do have any questions, please don't hesitate to get in touch with your regional office. Now, don't forget also, when we're talking about evidence, you must include 2 years worth of audited financial statements. For organisations applying for SKU for the first time, the department might be looking at whether or not the organisation has managed any other government funds in the past, that you have an established community presence, local networks, an alignment to your target cohort that you're looking to work with, any existing service delivery, industry and employer support. So that's where the letters of support are really important, particularly if you haven't delivered SKU before. And as with any project, it's really important to be clear about your financial obligations. This is the kind of detail that might be overwhelming to start with, but getting clear about what's required is much easier at the outset than at the end, where you might be required to produce specific records. So if you're unsure, the DESBIT teams are always available to chat. Please look at your service agreement really clear, in a detailed way. There are some very specific requirements in the accounting requirements. You will need a separate bank account for SKU or have an accounting or financial management system that's able to extract the transactions related to this project. This is the kind of thing that's very tricky to go back and rectify 3 months into a project. It's really important that you understand some of these financial requirements before you actually start delivering your project. Setting up a bank account, it's not particularly tricky, but takes some time. And it's not something you're going to be doing 2 months into delivering your project. Now, the last step in this stage is nailing it. We're editing, proofreading, attaching, and triple checking. So often by the time we get to this stage, we are close to the deadline. Let's be realistic. Often we are doing this part on the last day, and there's not a lot of time left for finessing, but it's really important to take a step back, and it can make the difference between it being a good application and being a really excellent application, is that proofreading stage. So let's talk a little bit about proofreading. Your response should be clearly written, and by this I mean using simple and direct language, using a predominantly active voice. And interestingly, on this point, there is evidence that people are more likely to believe what we've written if it's simple to understand. In fact, anything that makes a statement easier to mentally process can alter the reader's perception of truth of the statement and the intelligence of the author. This is called the illusion of truth effect. That's a bit of a fun fact for your Monday. So writing clearly requires clarity of thought, which is why it's important to think and plan your approach before you write. And that's why I really genuinely believe that all of that background work that you do up until this point will make this part really, the actual writing part, really easy. Keep the language simple. We do not need big fancy words. Please don't use jargon or euphemisms. Make sure you remember that the assessor or the reader may not work in your line of work, and they may not know what acronyms or sector jargon mean. So making sure you're being really clear about that. Imagine you're explaining the program to a family friend or a family member who doesn't work in the same sector as you. Would they be able to easily understand what your project is actually about? Now, lose adverbs or any words that don't add value, such as really, basically, actually. This is very important if there's a word count and you're limited in the amount of words that you can use, which is the case for Skilling Queenslanders for work. Now, your response should be concise. Think less is more, but make sure it's enough. Use your best examples, not all of your examples. Being concise and clear go hand in hand. You can use acronyms and abbreviations, but use them wisely so they don't obstruct clarity. Of course, you can use the pretty usual writing principle where you write out a long title once and then you put in brackets the shortened version, and you can use that from there on. Just making sure you're not using, again, jargon and acronyms that you're assuming the reader will know what they mean. The opposite to being concise is failing to get to the point, and you often see this in responses that include lots of detail and examples but don't make an explicit connection between them and don't seem to have a clear purpose. Now, this doesn't necessarily mean they're bad points, but it means you haven't done the work to establish their relevance, and it's really important that you make the reader do as little work as possible. They shouldn't be searching for the meaning or the key message. It should really be quite obvious to them what you're trying to say. A really hard thing about proofreading and writing is cutting words. So sometimes we come up with a phrase or an example that we really like. It could be that's really well written, sounds really clever. You spent an hour working on that particular paragraph, and they're the ones that can be really hard to take the knife to when you're needing to cut words out. And that's why we all need editors or proofreaders, or it's quite an advantage to us if we can utilise someone to proofread our work. They will be objective and take out anything that they go, look, this sentence does sound great, but it doesn't really directly address any of the selection criteria, and you're actually a bit light on in addressing this part. So I would recommend you take out this little paragraph or this sentence and spend your word count over here instead. You rarely need words like perhaps, maybe, try, attempt, possible. They tend to creep in when we're not sure or aren't confident to make a strong statement. And you can see that really well here in the example on the screen. So instead of perhaps you could try to reduce word count by looking to see if it's possible, maybe, to attempt to remove indecision, you can say exactly the same thing by saying you could reduce words by removing indecision. You've said exactly the same thing there with far fewer words. That's a bit of an extreme example, but I think you see the point. Now, your answer must be comprehensive. So it does need to be concise, but you can't cherry pick the bits you feel comfortable with and confident with answering. Remember, your answer is likely being scored on each criteria and likely subcomponents of each criteria. And this is where we talked about before, balancing your answer and making sure you're giving enough of a response for each aspect of your selection criteria. So, for example, if you've been asked to describe your project, explain the evidence base that underpins it, and talk about how you will achieve those outcomes, that's 3 things, and I'm just making these things up, but if you have been asked to address those 3 things in a selection criteria, describe your project, explain the evidence base that underpins it, and talk about how it will achieve outcomes, it's likely that the panel who's scoring that will look at about 33% for each of those components. So if you focus 60% just talking about describing your project and you only leave yourself 40% to talk about those other 2 aspects, you're going to have a really unbalanced score there. You're limiting your possible score. So avoid those unbalanced answers. Make sure you answer every aspect of the selection criteria. Avoid making unsubstantiated claims, things that you do not have any evidence for, because the onus is on you to provide evidence for the statements that you make. Now, your answer should persuade the reader to believe your claims. Other than being simple and clear, the best way to do this is by providing good examples and evidence. We're not being persuasive in a way where we're making things up to persuade them of something that's not true, but it's about having enough clear, relevant examples that the reader doesn't find it hard to believe what it is that you're saying. It can also help to use the same type of language and words as the funder, as this assists in establishing confidence that you as the organisation understand the funder and what they're trying to achieve. So you'll often see in funding applications particular words that you think, oh, they're quite, they're using that word quite a bit. I remember a few years ago, there was no funding application that didn't have the word innovative in it, for example. So, often in funding applications, people would be talking about innovative and innovation. And so really having a look at the language of the funder and making sure you're reflecting that in your responses. Now, your answer could be everything we've just talked about, but if your points are not relevant to the tender, it won't help. So being relevant is a critical feature of a good response, making sure your points link to the requirements of the particular tender or grant, and focus on the benefits you are offering to the funder in order to maximise the relevance. And if you didn't notice through those slides, I talked about making it clear, concise, comprehensive, persuasive, and on point. And here's the reveal for any Star Wars fans. That was 3 C's, a P and an O. So if you're looking for a way to remember those writing principles when you're doing your tender writing, remember this little gold guy, the C-3PO from Star Wars. Clear, concise, comprehensive, persuasive, on point. Now, do you need extra help? When you have written something, it can be very difficult to pick up on your own mistakes or unclear messages because you know what you're trying to get across and your brain is very clever and it fills in any gaps and it corrects mistakes as you're reading. I know this has happened to me many times. I have given something to someone else to have a look at and I've looked at it many times and I think, yep, there's no mistakes in there. And they'll come back with typos or things that I just missed. And that's because our brains just do that to us, don't they? It can be really hard to pick up on our own mistakes. And this is why it's really important to get someone to independently review your application, preferably someone who hasn't worked on your submission, so they can tell you if it clearly explains what your project is all about. So it's not only about grammar and typo and spelling, it's also about the clarity of the message. So were they able to very quickly get what it was that you were trying to say? Now, if you haven't got, so it's always best to have a person do that for you. But look, we've got the rise of artificial intelligence and those things these days. But apps such as Grammarly or Hemingway have been around for a few years. And they can be really useful. You can copy and paste your content into an app like this and they will actually give you live feedback. They'll see where the grammar doesn't make sense, words are doubled up. They'll suggest where you can evaluate your text so you can improve your writing and improve the clarity of the message. So utilising some of those apps is the second best thing if you can't get someone to proofread your work. And before you submit your application, please triple check it. Have you definitely uploaded your current letters of support? You haven't uploaded the ones from last time. You've definitely got your 2 most recent audited financial statements. Just making sure that you've got so I would recommend when you're putting together all your evidence for this current application that you've got it in a particular folder for this time around, so you're not accidentally attaching anything that's from an old application. That's really important. And once you've finished your application, the last stage of the process is to breathe out. You've done it, you reflect, and you ask for feedback. Really important. If you aren't successful in any application that you're submitting, please ask for feedback. It's a really important learning for you. Now, if you're applying for this round of Skilling Queenslanders for work, you will probably see, so successful projects will be delivered in the next financial year. So you'll be finding out, so applications finish on the 30th of March. A month or two after that, they'll be having a look through all those applications. The minister will be announcing results and you'll be ready to start working on your project in July. That's when the projects will commence. So that gives you, I know that's not a detailed timeline, but that's kind of what you're looking at for this time around. So maybe finding out end of April, May, perhaps, prepping yourself in June, ready to roll in July. And please ask your regional office for feedback. Really important information to take with you for next time. Now, before you do sign any service agreement, really important, again, that you look through the detail of the service agreement and check any conditions. particularly, I mentioned the financial obligations that you have for Skilling Queenslanders for work. It would be a good time to go and set up that bank account that you might need, or checking with your accounting team that your financial system is able to extract the transactions that you'll need to extract, and making sure that you fully understand all of your obligations before you sign on any dotted line. That concludes the tender writing content itself, and I'm going to move into the Human Rights Act. We've only got a few minutes left. I'm very quickly going to go through the Human Rights Act and the National Principles for Child Safe Organisations. Just wanted to check, are there any questions about the tender writing before I move into that content? Great. Please feel free to pop a question in the chat if you think of something, but I'm going to move on to these two things that you need to be aware of. If you're successful in obtaining a grant, these are two documents that you do need to be aware of and understand the implications for your project. Even if you don't obtain SKU funding, really important that organisations are aware of these anyway. Now, the Queensland Human Rights Act commenced on the 1st of January 2020. It lists 23 human rights, and modern human rights law has evolved since the late 1940s. We saw some really horrendous things happen in the world saw some really horrendous things happen in the 1940s and World War II, and many countries said, never again. We're never going to let this happen again. And so Australia has signed onto most of the existing international human rights treaties, but interestingly, it's only when those rights are incorporated into domestic legislation is when they can be properly protected. So Queensland was the third state or territory to introduce human rights legislation in Australia. The ACT did this in 2004, and then Victoria did it in 2006, and then we've had quite a big gap. And then Queensland came into this in 2019. And really, the objectives are to protect and promote human rights, build a culture that protects and promotes human rights, and help promote a dialogue about human rights. Now, this is where you come in, because if you obtain funding from the Queensland government, you are considered a functional public entity. So a public entity is an organisation or a body performing a public function in and for Queensland. Now, there are two types of public entities. Core public entities are government entities, and they're entities all of the time. They're things like the Department of Employment, Small Business and Training, a government agency or a department, the Queensland Police Service, state hospitals, state schools, state government ministers, local government and council employees. They are just core public entities, and they must abide by the Human Rights Act all of the time. When an organisation receives public funding, so Queensland government funding to provide services, they are considered to be a functional public entity because they're viewed in this circumstance as being an extension of government. They're utilising public funds to provide a service for the public. So if you are obtaining this funding, you must act compatibly with the Human Rights Act. And when you're making decisions about people, you must properly consider their human rights. Now, this, again, you will receive a copy of this, so please don't feel like you need to make a note of all of these right now, but these are all of the 23 human rights in Queensland, and things that you might be considering as an organisation are things like privacy, cultural rights, right to education. There are a few things to consider in context of the project that you are delivering. Now, it's important to note here that people have rights, not organisations. Okay. And whether or not you have citizenship has no bearing on human rights protection. If you're in Queensland, your human rights must be protected. Now, there are lots of resources on the Queensland Human Rights Commission website, so please check out their website. Or QCOS's website also has a lot of information to help your understanding of these. Now, the National Principles for Child Safe Organisations, critical for all of us to be across. We should all be invested in the safety of Australia's children. This is a key national reform that all states and territories have endorsed. Some of you will be familiar with the Royal Commission into Institutional Responses to Child Sexual Abuse, which uncovered some really shocking abuse of children within institutions in Australia. And the Commission recommended taking action to make organisations across the country safe for children. So these national principles are about making organisations child safe. As I said, these principles have been endorsed by the Commonwealth and all states and territories. So they've been endorsed by the Queensland Government, and they provide a nationally consistent approach to embedding child-safe cultures within organisations that engage with children and act as a vehicle to give effect to all the Royal Commission recommendations. These principles provide a way for organisations to consider whether or not their whole culture is safe. So it goes beyond blue cards, it goes beyond paper processes. It's actually about making sure we have a whole organisational culture that keeps children safe. Again, there's a lot of information out there to assist you to do this. Please, I recommend you jumping on the website to have a look at the national principles and for ideas on how you actually enact this in your organisation. It will help you as an organisation to respond to any concerns or suspicions that you might have within your organisation. And it does create conditions that reduce the likelihood of harm for children, which is something we all want. Now, and these are the national principles. You will get a copy of this. If you have any questions, I'm very happy to chat to you about this later. Okay, now that's it from me. We're right on 11:30. I just made it. So please keep an eye out for our post-event email. It will contain lots of information that I've gone through today. Thank you for your contributions, your questions. They were great. Maria's put a poll up here on the screen so that we can see how you found the workshop. And we look forward to seeing you again. Good luck. There is a tips and tricks webinar coming up a little bit later this month, just before the funding round closes, if you do want to just go over some of those tips again. But if not, again, get in contact with your regional office. Happy for you to get in touch with us. And check out the QCOS website, because there's a lot of short videos about partnering with RTOs and other aspects of your project delivery that I think you'll find really useful. So thanks for your time.